Hello everyone. Welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our previous episode, Masayuki unleashed an unbelievable power, bringing the deceased hero Rudra back into the world. Rudra, showcasing immense strength, awakened Damrata and Grand Bell, who then helped Hinata and Moss overcome their crisis. Hinata inherited Granbell's legendary sword, Truth, and his hero's egg. The battle then shifted to a combined effort of Hinata and Testarossa against the newly evolved Vega, while Rudra faced Feldway one-on-one. In this episode, we will focus on these two epic battles and the formidable power displayed by Rudra. Let's get started. Testarossa smiled as she faced Vega, while Hinata wore a cold smirk. The two clever women quickly devised a strategy. It was clear that using a sword alone wouldn't be enough to kill Vega, and large-scale magic attacks were out of the question within the capital. Therefore, Hinata would hold off Vega while Testarossa prepared a final, decisive strike. Testarossa used detection magic to accurately assess Vega's abilities, ensuring her last blow would obliterate him completely. Of course, Vega was no fool in battle. While taunting Hinata, he also gathered information about the battlefield. His first priority was to understand the sudden appearance of Damrata and Grand Bell. As a former member of the Imperial Army, Vega knew of Damrata's formidable strength. Though confident in his ability to defeat Damrata, the prospect of facing multiple powerful opponents was daunting. When Hinata explained that Damrata and Grand Bell had returned to the heaven, Vega quietly sighed in relief. Hinata understood Vega's terrifying potential but maintained her usual superior demeanor, effortlessly handling Vega's provocations. Vega, feeling a bit annoyed, immediately charged at Hinata, intending to use his significantly increased strength and speed to subdue her. His fist, accompanied by a powerful shockwave that tore through the surrounding space, aimed directly at Hinata. Hinata sidestepped the attack just in time, and in the same instant, the building behind her crumbled from the impact of the shockwave. With his punch missing the mark, Vega followed up with a roundhouse kick. The destructive force of this kick was akin to a strategic weapon. Without the all-material barrier in place, the resulting shockwave could have devastated the entire capital. This level of power posed a significant danger to Hinata. However, Hinata was unfazed. Even she found it remarkable that she felt no fear and could inexplicably predict the trajectory of Vega's attacks, successfully evading each one. Hinata had mastered an ability far more precise than Rimura's future attack prediction, known as future foresight. And future foresight was only a part of it. With her evolution, Hinata had acquired the ultimate skill Lord of Odds, evolved from her unique skill Mathematician. Besides future foresight, this ultimate skill included space-time manipulation and the rare world system ability, Virtual World. Utilizing these powers, even if Vega used clones, multiple arms, or attacked at much higher speed, Hinata could see through it all and dodge effortlessly. Vega grew increasingly irritated, mocking Hinata for only dodging his attacks. But now armed with the mythical sword Truth, Hinata could even block any unavoidable strikes head-on. She seized the opportunity to use psychological tactics, taunting Vega. Vega, unwilling to concede, shouted back that Hinata also had no means to attack him. While Vega's statement was true, Hinata didn't see it as a problem. From the start, her mission was to buy time for Testarossa to find the right moment to eliminate Vega. That moment had now arrived. Testarossa declared Vega's defeat and, using her ultimate skill Lord of the Underworld, unleashed her most potent single-target attack spell, White Flare. This spell would engulf the designated target in endless white flames until they were utterly destroyed. Though a single-target spell, its heat exceeded even that of nuclear magic. Vega instinctively sensed danger but couldn't evade in time. He was instantly vaporized. However, Testarossa's expression darkened with frustration, admitting she had messed up. Hinata looked at Testarossa in confusion. Testarossa explained that she hadn't managed to collect Vega's soul. While Vega might deceive others, he couldn't fool Primordial White's sensitivity to souls. Despite gaining numerous souls through White Flare, Vega's own soul was absent. Hinata pondered this revelation. Clearly, if she were in Vega's position, she wouldn't have been able to withstand white flare. Yet Vega had maintained an air of ease throughout, leading Hinata to conclude that Vega had been acting all along. Testarossa confirmed Hinata's assessment. From Moss's intelligence, she knew Vega was a cowardly and despicable individual who would typically flee, grovel, or put up a desperate struggle when faced with insurmountable odds. Vega's constant overconfidence was abnormal, indicating he had prepared a clone elsewhere, allowing him to resurrect even if this body was destroyed. Testarossa felt humiliated, believing she had failed to meet Rimura-sama's expectations. Hinata could already picture Rimura's gloating reaction upon hearing her failure. Because Hinata always maintained an air of infallibility, Rimura took particular delight in her moments of distress. Hinata found this trait of his particularly annoying, but sometimes seeing Rimura happy made her happy too. This mix of frustration and joy often left Hinata feeling conflicted. Meanwhile, Moss, who had been watching silently, held his breath. He dared not speak, knowing his master Testarossa was furious. Any misstep on his part might result in centuries of torment. In reality, Moss had noticed Vega's escape from the start. However, he kept silent, fearing that if he pointed it out, Testarossa would blame him for not implementing thorough surveillance and preventive measures. Moss trembled at the thought of Testarossa being criticized and ridiculed by other officers like Diablo and Carrera, praying fervently that he wouldn't become the scapegoat for her frustration. The perspective then shifted to Rudra. Calmly, Rudra removed his emperor's robes and handed them to Velgrind, before fixing his gaze on Feldway and summoning his mythical weapon, Deva. Deva responded to its master's call and appeared in Rudra's hand. This was the reason why Michael had failed to summon Deva earlier, as Rudra had already called it. Deva, paired with Milim's mythical scimitar Azura, was forged by Veldanava and stood among the highest-grade mythical weapons. Azura, originally Guy's weapon, had been given to Milim, highlighting Guy's affection for her. Seeing Deva, Feldway narrowed his eyes and remarked that the sword belonged to Veldanava-sama. Rudra responded that Veldanava had gifted it to him. Feldway's expression turned unforgiving, feeling it was unacceptable for such a precious artifact to be given to a mere human. Rudra, cutting off Feldway's words, retorted that it was none of Feldway's business and began to approach him slowly. As Rudra walked, he remarked that Feldway was still as overly cautious as ever, unwilling to use his full strength in battle. Feldway retorted that as a leader, one must be more careful and prudent than anyone else. Rudra quickly pinpointed Feldway's problem, not denying that a leader should indeed be cautious. However, if caution led to the failure of a battle that could have been won, it was a misjudgment. Rudra believed that if Feldway had used his true strength instead of relying on the Lord of Justice, Velgrind might have suffered more serious injuries. For this, Rudra sarcastically thanked Feldway but made it clear that he wouldn't forgive him for hurting Velgrind. As soon as he finished speaking, Rudra stepped forward with his left foot, a burst of killing intent emanating from him. A swift strike flashed like lightning towards Feldway's chest. Feldway parried the attack with a horizontal slash of his sword arc, a weapon bestowed by Veldanava, just like Rudra's Deva and Milim's Azura. With equally matched weapons, the deciding factor would be their skills. Rudra quickly shifted from a thrust to a slicing attack, his sword movements fluid and relentless, targeting Feldway's vital points. The clash of their blades resounded with explosive force, creating a crater in the ground from the sheer impact. The two separated briefly before rapidly closing the distance again. As soon as they landed, Rudra's sword was already in motion, but Feldway, relying solely on his castle guard, blocked the attack and countered when Rudra's sword momentarily withdrew. However, Rudra easily deflected the counterattack, remarking that Feldway was too weak. Hinata, observing the astonishing battle, was dumbfounded. She had never seen such powerful beings before. Both Rudra and Feldway were incredibly formidable, but Hinata sensed that Rudra was even stronger. This level of strength was beyond her imagination. Rudra, like a teacher instructing a student, pointed out that Feldway was overly dependent on his powers, bluntly stating that Feldway was trying to imitate him. However, this was not an easy feat. As he finished speaking, Rudra disarmed Feldway, sending his sword flying, clearly demonstrating the overwhelming difference in their power. Rudra was using Masayuki's fragile body yet still managed to overpower Feldway effortlessly. Calmly, Rudra explained that the ultimate skill Lord of Justice allowed for the real absolute defense, a technique he had long mastered. However, its obvious flaw was that while the castle guard was active, it prevented any offensive maneuvers. Rudra had perfected a method to counter this weakness by deactivating the castle guard at the precise moment of attack, amplifying his strikes with immense fighting spirit. Feldway knew of this technique and had tried to imitate it. Yet, it was only an imitation. Rudra flawlessly overcame the castle guard's limitations, whereas Feldway's self-assured attacks were riddled with flaws. Rudra pointed out that Feldway's swordsmanship was so deficient that it left him vulnerable to disarmament. This was a fact. Rudra's technique was not something that could be mastered overnight. Even Rudra himself had only perfected it through Veldonava's repeated teachings. The fact that Feldway could imitate it at all was already quite impressive. Feldway remained unperturbed. Although his technique was inferior to Rudra's, the castle guard could still perfectly defend against all attacks. He was still unscathed and felt no disadvantage. Feldway did not deny Rudra's words, but he had absolute confidence in the castle guard, believing that he would not fail. Rudra, seemingly mocking Feldway, said that Feldway underestimated him again. Rudra stated that he had been contemplating ways to overcome the castle guard ever since he acquired the Lord of Justice, a process spanning more years than he could remember. Feldway found Rudra's brazen words to be preposterous. The strongest defense castle guard was for sure invincible. Rudra revealed that he possessed the ultimate skill Lord of Oath. In Feldway's understanding, Veldonava used the Lord of Oath to monitor his numerous ultimate skills, functioning as an administrative authority. However, Rudra explained that Feldway's perspective was narrow. The Lord of Oath allowed its holder to hear the voices of the people. These voices included both desires for hope and cries for salvation from everyone connected to the creator god Veldonava. Even after Rudra obtained this skill, this power did not diminish. This was similar to the nature of the Lord of Justice. Since both skills allowed their holders to hear the voices of their followers, the Lord of Justice and the Lord of Oath could be considered analogous ultimate skills. We all know that the Lord of Oath possesses the Absolute Guard, constructed from the Infinity Prison. However, we also know that the Absolute Guard has often been breached at critical moments. It is not absolute at all. Rudra encountered this issue as well. But as a genius, Rudra had slightly altered the use of the Absolute Guard, turning it into a formidable offensive tool. With a slight smile, Rudra thrust the divine sword Deva towards Feldway. As the blade of Deva began to glow, Feldway's expression changed drastically. He instantly recognized that the nature of this glow was similar to that of his castle guard. Rudra explained that the power of those who believed in him increased his strength through the Lord of Oath. While Feldway had the faith of a mere 300,000 Phantom Race followers, Rudra carried the expectations of billions. The difference in numbers was staggering. This was the ultimate strike, absolute cut, which embodied the collective will of those who believed in Rudra. Feldway felt a surge of anger. The Lord of Oath had been missing since Veldonava's death, so there was no reason it should appear in the summoned Rudra. Rudra laughed heartily, pointing out that the summoned Grand Bell had just used the Lord of Hope, showcasing the extraordinary nature of Masayuki's Lord of Heroes. Even the abilities of vanished ultimate skills could be recreated. Now, Rudra wielded both the Lord of Justice and the Lord of Oath, making him incredibly powerful. Velgrind, witnessing the boundless brilliance of Rudra from the past, was left speechless by his candid explanation of his strategy. Velgrind's obsession with Rudra bordered on adoration. She never pointed out his flaws. In the end, only Rudra's sister, Lucia, would unreservedly criticize her brother's shortcomings. Rudra's ultimate strike targeted Feldway. Feldway, preparing to defend with all his might, not only activated the castle guard but also released all his barriers to block this inevitable attack. Rudra concentrated all his energy on the sword hilt, and light beams gathered, forming the most radiant halo. The intense and pure light held everyone's breath. This heroic figure, which had once illuminated a world darker than night, carried the hopes of all people, past and present. With these hopes turned into power, Rudra unleashed his ultimate move, Nova Break. The surge of light roared, engulfing Feldway and everything around him. Although Veldrine exerted all her strength to redirect the main shockwave upwards, even the residual impact obliterated the so-called all-material barrier. This was beyond the capability of mere swordsmanship, but it was precisely why Rudra was who he was, the initial strongest hero capable of confronting primordial red gi. Feldway's body was completely exposed to the scorching impact, leaving him kneeling on the ground, vomiting blood. Rudra raised his right hand with a smile, declaring this the natural outcome, and announcing his victory. Feldway was utterly bewildered by everything before him. Rudra calmly explained that Feldway's excessive arrogance and disregard for others blinded him to the essence of things. Feldway retorted that the Rudra before him was merely an empty shell, unqualified to lecture him. The defeated and the victor glared at each other. Feldway then declared this would be his last defeat, and that there wouldn't be a next time. Feldway stood up as if nothing had happened, though the blood he coughed up betrayed the impact of Rudra's attack. Rudra sighed, recognizing that Feldway had completely ignored his words. Rudra sarcastically remarked on Feldway's stubbornness, asserting that he would always emerge victorious no matter how many times Feldway challenged him. At that moment, Mai Furuki appeared, using teleportation to whisk Feldway away from the scene. Veldrine, enamored, pressed Rudra's face into her chest. However, Rudra's face turned beet red. Masayuki had returned. The power of Rudra's soul had been exhausted during the Nova Break, making it difficult for him to maintain his persona. Yet Rudra had pushed through to deliver his final words, allowing Feldway to escape due to sheer exhaustion. The battle had come to an end. Hinata approached and naturally bowed in greeting to the Emperor. Masayuki, lost in thought, was torn between feelings of identity and confusion, unsure if he was truly himself or Rudra. The people of Ingrassia, who had been watching the live broadcast of the battle, erupted in cheers. Initially, some had doubted Prince Elric, but witnessing the battle and Masayuki's imperial demeanor, they now fervently chanted his name. This was the first time Masayuki had displayed his combat prowess, and without a doubt, he had not disappointed the expectations of countless people, showcasing unparalleled strength. Masayuki had grown accustomed to such adoration since arriving in this world, but the people's enthusiasm was even more intense this time. Under the influence of the Lord of Heroes' power, the Holy Knight Order smoothly managed the scene and explained the conspiracy to the public. Of course, due to Rudra's possession, Masayuki didn't know that he would experience a rare and excruciating growth pain called soul pain the next day, unaffected by any magical healing. Rimuru soon arrived at the scene, and Veldrine couldn't help but tease him for arriving too late and missing Masayuki's heroic display. Rimuru hadn't expected the powerful Feldway to be defeated by Masayuki. Masayuki tried to explain, but Rimuru simply said that victory was something to be proud of. With battles still raging in Aleem's kingdom and Feldway's next plan imminent, the situation across various fronts remained dire. Rimuru quickly shifted his focus, preparing for the next fight. Let's analyze why Seal couldn't further discover the use of the Lord of Oath to break Castle Guard. Firstly, I believe that using the Lord of Oath as a medium to gather the people's voices requires a more emotional understanding. Rudra is inherently emotional, whereas Seal is the epitome of rationality. Secondly, Seal has access to many skills and can use other methods to break Castle Guard if needed. Thirdly, Rudra has held the Lord of Oath and the Lord of Justice for a much longer time, giving him ample time to understand the characteristics of both skills. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, and let's discuss together. In the final chapter of TenSura Volume 19, Ivaraj successfully awakened. He sensed Michael's power, the strength that had annihilated tens of thousands of phantoms in an instant. Michael paid no attention to Ivaraj and left the other world after his slaughter. Ivaraj could easily kill these phantoms too, but they had become his toys to pass the time over the long years. Ivaraj felt an endless void and instinctively opened his mouth, a gesture that brought about unimaginable change. Ivaraj, the embodiment of evil, whose very essence was to destroy, suddenly experienced emotions from the lingering resentment left by the phantoms Michael had killed. By devouring 300,000 souls, Ivaraj began to awaken and evolve, leading to his rebirth. Ivaraj became more cunning and evil, intent on driving the world towards an end. Coincidentally, the gate Michael passed through was left open, and Ivaraj felt a deep curiosity about it. With this anticipation, Ivaraj fell into a pre-awakening slumber, and the ancient evil was about to awaken. Alright, that's all for this video. From the next episode, we will start reviewing TenSura Volume 20. Feldway will further escalate the war, and more complex and dangerous battles will erupt everywhere. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.